Welcome, Doc here, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about how this electricity in your brain works. So you are making electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from the time you're born until the time you die. And when we really look at this, we don't plug ourselves into the wall and charge ourselves up, right? We are making electrical current. We're like the world's most efficient power plant. We make our own energy. The primary resource for this energy actually isn't food or water, it's oxygen. 80 to 90% of our energy comes from oxygen, which we will talk to you about how you're using that along the way as we're working with the electrical current. But in a previous video, we got to see the electrical activity running through my brain, and we looked at the fast buckets and the slow buckets. And today we're going to talk about how do we understand what's going on with this electricity and what do these different frequencies in the brain contribute to. So first, let's look at this thing called the autonomic nervous system. So we have this, we're making electrical current all the time, and then we have to manage it. And so we have this part of our nervous system which allows us to manage things called our autonomic nervous system. And what it's doing is it's taking the electrical current and it's either making it go really, really fast or go really, really slow based on what's going on in our environment. So it makes sense if I saw a lion, I would go really, really fast. When I go to sleep at night, if I'm going to sleep well, I have to be able to go really, really slow. So the first thing behind a sleep problem typically is that the brain can't shut down and go slow. Now, most animals, they just interact with their environment and respond with their autonomic nervous system fast or slow based on what's going on. But as humans, we have this big frontal lobe, and so we can think about the future and all the what ifs. What if this happens? And the what abouts, what about what happened to me when I was 7 years old? We can think about these things, right? And so that can override sometimes a very calm and non-threatening environment with a lot of anxiety and fast activity. And so when we look at the EEG, we have other ways that we look at this with the heart and with breathing and skin temperature and skin conductance and hormones. But what you're working on is EEG technology. And so the EEG is the ultimate, kind of the holy grail in understanding what the autonomic nervous system is. And you have a window into your autonomic nervous system every time you run a session. And so you'll hear me like send a number to you, or you'll, look at your graphs every 10 sessions and you'll see this high beta and this theta stuff. And so we want you to understand, like, where do these come from and what is it that we're looking at? And so you have to understand that we have all these different frequencies of brainwave activity where the brain can go really, really slow. If you look down at the bottom of the left of the screen, you'll see 1 hertz. And 1 hertz means that the brainwave does one cycle in a second. So it probably doesn't take much for you to think about, what does 30 hertz mean way here on the right. That means in 1 second, that brainwave cycles 30 times. It's super, super fast. And we need that if we see a lion, but we don't want that when we're trying to go to bed at night. And so when we look at the different frequencies of EEG, they give us a biomarker. They let us see what's going on in your brain. So here's somebody who, because they have some high elevations at 8, 9, and 10, we know that they have heavy volume of imagination and creativity, but they also have a pocket to the left and the slower, which tells me they're having a little bit of a sleep problem. And then the other pocket that you see, if you look at the trend line and the little gaps, that shouldn't happen in a normal electrical current, but it's happening in their brain. So that tells me those frequencies have to do with focusing, being calm and focused. So we can literally get a perfect image of what the brain's doing. And then in this person's brain, we can also see at the right, you see some of those elevations going up. And those elevations tell me they have a little bit more what's called high beta, or these fast frequencies that they shouldn't have. We see this every time you run a session. We get to see all these. It's like a brain print, like your fingerprint, except it's the electrical current in the brain, which is really, really cool. So let's kind of mark this out just a little bit so you understand a few things. So anything, let's just say, I'm going to just kind of go from here over. These are the fast brain waves, and they're referred to high beta. So you will hear me say many times high beta or the high beta ratio. Okay. We'll talk about how we get the ratio in a second, but high beta just means fast frequencies of the brain. Do you need those? Yes, you do, if you experience a crisis so that it can activate your adrenal system. But you don't need it when you're in relationships, talking, or when you're trying to sleep, or when you're trying to be creative. Um, this is typically something we don't want to use a lot of because it can lead to anxiety. In people who've had PTSD, this is very high. In autism, this is very high. In obsessive compulsive disorder, this is also very high. So we don't want to live in high beta because that can cause a lot of problems for the other organs in our body that are working harder than they really need to. Those are the fast frequencies. Then over here on the left are the slow frequencies. And there's different ones in there, delta, thetas, alphas. But the one I want you to be aware of is theta, because you're going to hear a lot about that. And ultimately the theta ratio, which is calculated all the time when we're talking about different numbers and you see your graphs. When you see theta, you should think slow waves, slow waves. I don't want too much of those because then I can get kind of inattentive and not focusing. But I also don't want too little because that means I'm going to have issues with recovery, sleeping. You'll hear me say that a lot if you have low theta ratio. Hey, how's your sleep going? And ultimately, your memory functioning gets impacted if these are low. Now, you can see that these vary in height, and that's because of the nature of their frequency. So a 1 hertz that cycles in 1 second has a very high amplitude. That's the physics of it. A 30 hertz has a very shallow amplitude, so you should see them stagger downhill. This person, you see some of that, but you see those pockets, and that is the individual's uniqueness in how they work. And in some cases, we're trying to improve those pockets, decrease your high betas, raise your thetas, or get your thetas in this ultimate range. And the middle is the zone. If you haven't watched the video, Uncommon Focus, fantastic. It talks about these frequencies. They're pretty much called sensory motor rhythm, or they're around 12 to 16 hertz. Those are the sweet spot. When you're stuck in this spot, this is where you get so much done in such little time. So let's finish up with this. I've said theta ratio and high beta ratio. Well, what is that a ratio of? So what that's doing is it's taking all the high beta activity and it's putting it over top of the zone activity so that we can see which do you have and what's the volume of those, because you're going to have both. And what we don't want is that the high beta dominates the zone activity. That's not good. That's anxiety, stress, poor sleep, and ultimately chronic disease. So the ratio is always the volume of your high betas over top of the zone. Then the theta ratio is taking your slow activity, your recovery, your sleep, your memory, your restorative states, and it's putting it over top of the zone to see how does it compare to this ideal set of brainwaves. And that's when I say ratio and you see graphs that are looking at ratios, I want you to remember looking forward is it's the volume of all my stress activity over top of zone, and the theta ratio is the slow recovery activity over top of zone. If you have any questions on these ratios and how this works, feel free to reach out to us in email or text, or read some of the documents that we have online. And we are so excited to have you in the program so that we can maximize your potential.